This was one of the videos recorded for one of the meetings at Christi at UTSA. Aside from a few minor edits, it's virtually the exact same video, but in any case, here's the video. Hope y'all enjoy. All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Today is the 6th meeting, I believe, for Christi at UTSA. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to introduce Dr. David Falk. Dr. David Falk is an Egyptologist whose research focuses on ancient Egyptian culture, language, and its connections to the biblical world. He earned his PhD in Egyptology from the University of Liverpool, I believe, and has conducted extensive work on Egyptian ritual texts, temple practices, and the historical context of the Exodus. As both a scholar and educator, Dr. Falk brings deep academic expertise together with a gift for making the ancient world come alive. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Falk.
Awesome. Is my audio coming through okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay. If you came here looking to get a lot of deep information on the Exodus, I'm going to be sorry to disappoint you. Also, if you're here looking for something on apologetics, I'm probably going to disappoint you also. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you stories, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories today. And then I'm going to tell you why they're important, okay? Now, the first story I'm going to tell you is my personal story. It's my story. It's a true story. My name is David Falk. Some of you might be familiar with my channel. And if you are familiar with with my channel, you know I'm a historian. I'm not an apologist, so it makes me wonder how I got invited to this. But regardless, when I went to college, I was fascinated with philosophy and apologetics. I loved apologetics. I enjoyed debate. The study of countercult engagement really had me interested. I learned the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, and arguments for morality. I did my undergraduate degree in philosophy, specializing in the philosophy of religion and science. My knowledge of this topic was encyclopedic. However, as I practiced apologetics, I noticed a problem. None of those arguments worked. They were not the slightest bit compelling to an unbeliever. And the more I did apologetics, the more I seemed to have run into this wall where the arguments were more compelling to those who were already predisposed to believe. So I got to thinking, well, if that's true, was I really doing evangelism? Was I reaching the lost? Or was I doing a kind of hedge protection, which is at best a kind of teaching ministry? But then my focus changed. I went and got my graduate degrees, and I started my early academic career as a teacher. I noticed people were coming to Christ around my speaking events and through my YouTube channel. Well, how could that be? I wasn't using any philosophical arguments, no syllogisms, no altar calls. I was just telling the story of history. If you're an evangelical, you know the lack of altar calls is almost tantamount to sacrilege. So, what was happening? Now, I'm going to tell you a different story. We're going to change gears a little. This time, this next story is going to be fictional. Okay? And even though this story is just 6 words long, it conveys effectively the power of story. So listen very, very carefully, otherwise you'll miss it. Here's the story. Baby shoes for sale, never used. Now, I don't have to tell you anything else about this story. You know what happened. You understand the subtext. This story conveys truth, even though it's fiction, because somewhere out there in the world, there are parents that have lost a pregnancy. You feel the emotional pain of this story. That is the power of story. Chances are you did not get your morality from your parents, your teachers, or your pastor. Chances are you learned the bulk of your morality from stories you consumed. Story determines the morality of a nation. And all the other stuff that we think builds up morality is really just supporting the narrative of the story. The Hays Code was abolished in 1968. For those of you who don't know, the Hays Code was a voluntary content standard that was used by the movie industry, limiting graphic violence, sex, and religious blasphemy. And in response to the industry doing away with the Hays Code, Christian conservatives abandoned Hollywood to make their own entertainment. The unintended consequences were that it handed the keys to the nation's morality over to unbelievers and filled Christian entertainment.
Hey, Dr. Falk, we're losing you like every 5 seconds or so. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, gotcha.
I lost your camera though, so I can't see the audience anymore.
Yeah, I turned off the camera because it was lagging a little bit.
Okay.
Gotcha. Well, we all know what you look like, so maybe you can turn off your camera just to see if there's less lag or something.
Well, let's see. I'm not getting any lag here, at least not in my frames, not on my camera, because
okay.
Because that's all. You're not actually getting the image directly from my camera. You're getting it through screen share.
Yeah.
So it's not my camera. Can't be my camera. You're not getting a direct feed to my camera.
Okay. Do you have anything you were going to screen share, Dr.
No.
Falk?
Nothing.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so if you want to turn off the screen share, I'm fine with that.
Okay. I think you might have to turn it off on your end.
All right, let me turn it off. There.
Oh, turn off incoming. Oh, okay, never mind. You got it. Sweet. All right, sorry.
Okay, where did you want me to resume here?
Something about the H code being abolished.
The Hays Code.
The Hays Code, my bad.
The Hays Code was abolished in 1968. For those of you who don't know, the Hays Code was a voluntary content standard that was used by the movie industry, limiting graphic violence, sex, and religious blasphemy. In response to the industry doing away with the Hays Code, Christian conservatives abandoned Hollywood to make their own entertainment. The unintended consequences were that it handed the keys to the nation's morality over to unbelievers and filled Christian entertainment with badly written slop. That slop, by the way, is not accidental. It's part of a carefully designed marketing plan by big church entertainment. It's a cash cow that weakens faith and morality, but fills the pockets of wealthy underwriters. Because here's the fact. Story, if done right, triggers emotions. Emotion doesn't come from your higher consciousness, but deeper down in your reptile brain. Your reptile brain controls your fight or flight response, and it doesn't have time to process that through higher consciousness. Higher consciousness is too slow to process survival instincts. If you're afraid when you see that lion, but you fail to run, you soon become lion chow. So fear is part of your limbic system. Your limbic system controls emotion, behavior, And best of all, long-term memory. Ever wonder why oral cultures have such excellent memory retention? It's because they tell their history as story. Story affects your emotion, which affects your long-term memory. This is why every fiction writer strives to resonate with your emotions, so you remember their story. And that affects your behavior and morality. So then, let's get to the heart of the matter, which is that history is a story. It's the story of mankind and the story of God redeeming the world. How do we normally teach children the Bible? We typically use stories. We give them stories of the Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, Samson, and David versus Goliath. Why do we teach children using stories? Why don't we just use syllogisms, right? That's a better way to communicate truth, isn't it? The reason is because we instinctually know that children commit those stories to long-term memory. Now, I do want to caution you that many stories we tell children in Sunday school are factually incorrect, and this leads to problems down the road. Children will retain the ideas they were taught in Sunday school well into adulthood. Teach them a ridiculous notion of Noah's Ark, and that's what they will see as what the Bible has taught well into their 80s. But this persistence of memory shows you how powerful storytelling is. So then the big question is, if storytelling is so effective, why do we stop teaching the Bible as a story? The fact is that conservative Christians have an odd relationship with storytelling. Ministries like Focus on the Family, which was founded in 1977, made storytelling part of their children's ministries, but expected adults to set that aside for more practical matters like careers, raising children, and earning lots of money to spend on large donations to parachurch ministries. The fact is, you get the point here. American Christianity has steered Christian adults away from storytelling, labeling it as frivolous, when it is essential to how we come to believe and remain believers. Your average deconstructed skeptic leaves the faith between ages 20 to 24. That's not a coincidence. That's roughly between their second and final years of college. This is also the point where American parents put pressure on their kids to grow up, move out, and give up teenage obsessions with literature, TV, anime, comic books in order to focus on their careers. Cut off from story, youth latch on to other narratives. This is where and when they're going to get deconstructed or even radicalized. Because here's the thing. Story is hardwired into us. If we don't get story from one place, we'll get it from somewhere else. Because God designed us to learn and grow through story. The need for story is primal and instinctual. When our ancestors weren't fighting off saber-toothed tigers and hunting mammoths, we were sitting around the campfire, hearing stories of creation and of our ancestors' history. That's right. History is a story. It's a true story. And that's what makes history such a powerful apologetic. So, getting back to the very first story I told you, when I started teaching history, I didn't do it with dry facts or dates. Oh yes, if you take a history class from me, you'll get some dates. Dates are unavoidable. But I focus on the story aspect of history. So then, let's say I want to talk about the Exodus. I'm going to tell you the story of the sons of Jacob arriving in Egypt in the 17th century BC during the famine of the Middle Bronze Age, while Egypt was under Hyksos rule. This is around the same time as the chariot was established in Egypt. Joseph rose then to the office of vizier, and he settled his family around the city of Avaris, which we know is in the region of Goshen. And Joseph imposed a 20% tax on the Egyptians, which remained the normative tax rate in Egypt until the arrival of the Assyrians. At the beginning of the 18th dynasty, the Hyksos were driven out, and the population of Avaris was enslaved, as recorded in the biography of Akhmosa, son of Abana. After a series of plagues that are similar to those that occurred at the end of the First Intermediate Period, as found in the prophecies of Neferti and Ipuwer, the Israelites are led out of Egypt and cross the Reed Sea during a wind set-down that destroyed most of Pharaoh's chariots. When Avaris was abandoned in the mid-19th dynasty, the city was turned into a graveyard, all except for Avaris's deep-sea port, which remained in operation until the capital city of Pi-Ramesses was also abandoned. 40 years later, the Late Bronze II-B citadel at Jericho and the city of Hatzor were destroyed at roughly the same time. 5 years after that, the pharaoh Merneptah records an encounter with the Israelites in the Shephelah. 50 years after, Israelite settlements with Israelite material culture pop up all across the Promised Land. Now, I have just given you the history and the story of the Exodus. I've added a lot of archaeological details to the story, so everything's backed up by evidence. Notice I didn't talk about God, or miracles, or anything theological. It's just straight history. All of it's true, and many find this telling to be compelling. Now, you need to understand what's happening with my rendition of the Exodus story to get how this all works. I used to work for Abbott Laboratories, which is a giant pharmaceutical company. It's a corporation that's federally regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. We were told that should an FDA audit ever occur, the first thing the auditors are going to do is check the paperwork, not our chemistry. Now, you might be thinking, why is the FDA checking our paperwork and not the chemistry? After all, this company made pharmaceuticals that humans consume, which, if improperly made, could be harmful to people. The reason is deceptively simple, which is the paperwork is the easy bit. If you can't get the paperwork correct, nobody is going to trust the chemistry, which is the difficult bit. When we talk about apologetics, history is the easy bit. You can look that up. And provided you get the facts correct, it's easy to trust. Theology is the difficult bit. There's a lot of supposition, speculation, and as a result, theology can be more difficult to trust. Apologists sometimes think they can fudge the history, but still claim to have their theology or philosophical arguments correct. But getting the easy stuff wrong breaks the chain of trust. If you get the easy things wrong, that destroys people's trust in everything else you have to say. History, when told well told and told correctly, builds trust to the extent that people will trust your theology because you're getting all the little things correct. Christianity is a historic faith. It is a faith anchored in and built around history. Storytelling is a trust-building exercise. Get the history correct, and many will come to God without prompting. Get it wrong, and people will be repelled from the faith because they think you have no respect for what is true. History is apologetics, and it doesn't take very much to discover how important this is. Like, for example, if you look at, say, the curricula of Roman Catholic apologetic programs, it's 90% church history. Very little argumentation. Most of their curricula is centered around things like theological development in history, church councils, various figures in history. So history is a huge component of certain traditions of apologetic programs. So then, knowing all this, we start to see why some skeptics attack even the secular retelling of religious history. If you look at the Gospels, they are historic narratives of the life of Jesus Christ. In the same way, the opening chapters of the book of Exodus tell the historical narrative of Moses and the Israelites. One could tell the Exodus story in entirely secular terms. You could basically tell the Exodus story as the Israelites being enslaved in Egypt. They experienced some hypernatural events that they ascribed to their God Yahweh. In other words, a completely materialistic telling of the story. And you might think that a non-theist would find that acceptable, but somehow it isn't. And there's a reason why they reject even a completely materialist version of history. And that's because history is a story that is not neutral. Even a purely secular version of history told in a completely secular way still implies that not just that the material aspects of the biblical record are correct, but it gives greater probability to the theological aspects. And therefore, the theological implications, which is the difficult stuff, becomes somehow easier to believe. This is why the two main targets of biblical skepticism are Christ and Moses. So then, how do we apply all this? First, recognize that a mind convinced is not a heart changed. If we want to change people for Christ and eternity, you have to reach in their limbic system and tickle that reptile brain. Now, this is not manipulation, even though people are manipulated like that every day, all day by advertising. Coca-Cola wouldn't spend $5 billion a year on advertising if it didn't work. This is about transmitting a message so that it is received, that it resonates, it is remembered, and the Holy Spirit can work through it. And ultimately, that people's behavior become more Christ-like. To qualify this, you have to stimulate the emotions to activate long-term memory to present the opportunity to change lives and behavior. Second thing is, one of the most effective ways to do this is through story. And history is a story. It's about a people, a Messiah, and our God. To effectively communicate history, we have to become better storytellers. History, story, and apologetics are joined at the hip. Apologetics and scripture compel us to give every man an answer who asks a reason for the hope that lies within. Answers resolve questions. And most apologists and most of us are pretty good at that. But reasons are where we drop the ball. Unlike answers, which resolve questions, reasons answer people. Reasons compel. Reasons are not just answers. They reach inside and they compel us through our emotions. We need to tell stories, the truest stories we can possibly tell. The stories of history that reach people is probably the most important story we can ever tell, because history is where people live. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dr. Falk. That was the end, right?
That's the end.
Gotcha. Okay, we're gonna proceed with the Q&A portion of this meeting, and
you guys can ask me any questions you want on the paper or on the Exodus or whatever. This is your opportunity to ask me anything.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the first question will be from me, and then feel free to think about your questions, guys, too. But I guess my question is, in a stream you had with Inspiring Philosophy, you said that you don't hold to the idealized number of like people in the Exodus.
No.
Yeah, I think you had like a different theory, like the clan theory or something like that. Could you
Yeah,
explain what that is?
Sure. It's the idea that what's being mentioned in the census is basically a count of clans. Okay? Aleph can mean 1,000, but it can also mean a large group of people. It can mean an army. It can mean a clan. It can mean a massive group of people. And this idea was first proposed by Petrie, William Flinders Petrie, well, in the biblical work he did. So it's not a new idea by any stretch of the imagination. So what you have here in the census is it's broken down. The census is broken down into thousands, hundreds, and say, I think it's 50s. Okay. You would have a breakdown of clans, clades, and families, essentially. Now, the difference between a clan and a clade is an offshoot of a clan.
Oh, you cut off right after you said 50s.
Oh, okay. Basically, when you're talking about groups of 1,000, you're talking about a clan. Okay, and this was an idea that was proposed by Petrie. Petrie proposed this idea in the early 20th century. But the hundreds, that's going to be your clades, and then your 50s are going to be families.
Gotcha. So basically, whenever the Exodus, as far as I understand your theory, whenever it talks about a certain number of Israelites, it's more like referring to like a family unit or like a clan or something like that.
Yeah, like a clan.
Okay.
Every tribe is made of many.
How many
clans.
of y'all had questions, real quick? Okay, we have.
I can't hear you.
Hey, how's it going? For maybe some of us who aren't so familiar with the kind of debates and archaeology surrounding Exodus, the Exodus account, could you break down a little bit more of the idealistic numbers, like kind of what we just mentioned? Because from my understanding, there's a lot more people mentioned in the Exodus account than show up in the archaeology. Am I mistaken on that, or yeah?
No, you're not mistaken about that. There's a lot more that show up in at least in a naive reading of those census texts. Here's the thing: the numbers themselves are not even internally consistent. Okay, if you were to read them just as naive numbers, like after the first census, it also gives you a count of firstborns. Well, that count of firstborns is only about 11,000. So, that would not make sense if you had a population of 2 million. So the numbers internal to the Bible itself cannot be reconciled if you read them naively. Now, there's 9 different explanations as to what those numbers mean. And it's going to really depend upon who you ask, which explanation you get. But the numbers in the ground say the archaeology shows a population in the area of between at least the city of Avaris, which is where everyone sort of agrees the Exodus gets its start at the city of Avaris. It was the largest Semitic city west of the Orontes, and it was. Everyone agrees that this is probably where the Israelites got their start, at least among those who believe in an Exodus. The population there was between 5 and 50,000 people. So it would make sense then if you had, say, 11,000 firstborn from an area like that. Maybe they're collecting more people along the way as they leave. Undoubtedly, they are. But 11,000-ish is not going to make sense if you're going to be talking about... Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I was asking. Were you continuing, Dr. Falk?
I was still giving an explanation, but okay.
I think you cut out for a bit.
Yeah, I think you got some telephony problems here.
Yeah. Yeah, can you just run back like 10 or 20 seconds?
Okay. The site of Avaris has between 5 and 50 a supported population between 5 and 50,000 people. Okay. So it's not a naive reading of the census numbers is not going to work with that, because a naive reading of those census numbers are going to be more than the population, the entire population of the Egyptians. So it's a naive reading of those texts is going to be very, very problematic. And as I said, it doesn't even work internally to the Exodus account itself because of the number of firstborn. Now I'm finished.
Gotcha. He said that answered his question. Thanks, Dr. Falk. Did we have any other questions from the audience? We have another one.
Hello, Dr. Falk. I just want to ask, would you say, like, overall, do you think, like, the story of Exodus in the Bible is, like, historically accurate?
Yes, I would say overall it contains true history. There's really actually nothing in the book of Exodus that I would say is that remarkable, to be honest. I think we tend to sometimes overread the book of Exodus. You could, as I said before, you could tell the Exodus story in almost completely secular terms and still come out with practically the same story. There's nothing in the book of Exodus that cannot be accounted for through other events that either took place in Egyptian history or that require, say, first order miracles. So there's really no reason to doubt the Exodus account other than to sort of undermine its story.
Did I answer your question? Cool. I think that answered his question. Do you have time for another question, sir?
I've got time for lots of questions.
Cool. I was going to ask, I think us familiar with apologetics are more able to understand kind of when you say like a naive reading of the Bible, this kind of thing. I think in the 21st century, a lot of us are tempted to read hyper literally in a kind of our context. What are some practical kind of recommendations for people who are maybe like, people who are just normal lay Christians who are used to reading the Bible kind of literally? That's kind of the only context they're familiar with. What are some practical resources for helping people get their foot in the door for understanding the Bible in a more, first century and ancient and Old Testament kind of framework, and if that makes sense?
It does make sense. We are separated by 2,000 years. Our culture and their culture is separated by 2,000 years of history. Our culture isn't their culture, and their culture isn't ours. So we are going to have some difficulty trying to figure out some of the contextual bits. So what I always recommend is people get a good introductory text that it really explains the Bible well in its historical context. Baker's Backgrounds of the Old Testament, I think, is very good. It's a very good book for that. So, but that's usually how I tell people is, you gotta read the Bible in its context, and context is king. Everything. I mean, every context. And the Bible has more than one context. It's got its historical context. It's got a religious context. Each passage has a context within its chapter. Each chapter has a context within its book. It's got a context in its genre. There's a dozen different types of context. So getting good resources that help you determine what the context of whatever you're reading is an invaluable resource. So they basically need these resources to help you understand what's going on. And that's what I would recommend for a layperson, is get some good, these don't have to be professional references or anything like that. Like the Baker's book is geared towards a first year college student. So that's a very understandable work.
All right, sweet. Dr. Falk, here's one question I had. You take the late dating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Early dating or no Exodus?
I take the late date.
Yeah, but if you had to choose between early date or no Exodus, what would you choose?
Oh, I can't make that choice. They're both bad options.
Gotcha. Cool. Did we have any other questions from the audience, real quick? Oh, okay. No, we didn't talk about that. Dr. Falk, do you care to summarize the situation between the early dating and late dating controversy with respect to the Exodus?
Sure. The early date basically believes that the date of the Exodus is in 1446 per 1 Kings 6:1. You date essentially you get a date for the year the Temple of Solomon was built, and that's usually 966, 967. No one really argues that. But then they add 480 years to that to get the 1446 date. Okay? The late Exodus dating is done archaeologically. It uses the evidence in the Bible to date the Exodus to around 1263-ish, give or take a certain number of years. And it's based on things like the appearance of the city of Ramesses and Pithom in the text, since those both post-date 1446. So that's both views kind of in a nutshell there. Now, scholars, at least specialists in Egyptology, and even say the majority of Bible scholars who believe in an Exodus, which is still a minority, but those who believe in the Exodus will generally side with the late date because of its, say, evidential weight. Whereas you tend to find, say, early dating more amongst, say, clergy and laity. So that's sort of where it's one of those things that one of those debates where sort of the serious debate is kind of over, and we're kind of not in the serious phase. I mean, every debate kind of goes through this process where there's a serious debate and serious argumentation and back and forth and struggle to determine it. But the problem is that once you sort of resolve certain questions, then debates often take a less serious stage, as it were. And I think as far as the Exodus is concerned, we're kind of in that, say, post-serious stage of the debate.
All right, sweet. Did we have any other questions from the audience? No? Okay, I guess this last one is for me. So City of Avaris is up there in terms
Yep.
of like evidential pieces. I guess, would you say that, what would you say are the other like pieces of evidence to get familiarized with respect to arguing for a late date for the Exodus? I know, like, for example, you talk about the Ark of the Covenant having Egyptian influence or from
Yep, the Ark of the Covenant has Egyptian influence that dates to between Amenhotep III and Ramses XI. Okay, so it's definitely after that sort of Amenhotep II period. You also, in the case of, say, Pi-Ramesses, Pi-Ramesses was a city that was first, how do I say this? it was practically a virgin site when it was made into a capital by Ramses II. The only thing that was there prior was a royal estate that was built by his father, Seti I. So Pi-Ramesses did not exist. The city of Ramses did not exist prior to around 1300 BC. In the case of Pithom, Pithom was never called Pithom until it was named that by Ramses II. Ramses II renames the city of Cheku to Per Atum, House of Atum. And this is where we get the word Pithom from. The R after the Per drops off, and that's where you get P from. P-Thum, House of Atum. And it was named that after Ramses II built a temple to Atum, which was a creation deity, at that city, at the old city of Cheku. We also have the appearance of, say, various toponyms, like Migdol. Migdol was built by Seti I, who was Ramses II's father. We also find in the Ramesside documents cities such as Balsaphon, Pi-Hahiroth, and what's it called now? Succoth. These also appear in Ramesside documents. So it's clearly, there's a clear Ramesside context that we find in, say, at least the biblical itinerary of the Exodus route. So the other thing too is the city of Pi-Ramesses is incredibly close to Avaris. Now again, everyone agrees that Avaris is the place where the Israelites get their start. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that even though the Israelites are sort of concentrated there at Avaris, the king wasn't always a next door neighbor. During most of the 18th dynasty, the capital city where the king lived was in Thebes, hundreds and hundreds of miles away. But somehow Moses goes to the king, talks to the king, returns to the elders, talks to the elders, goes back to the king, back and forth between elders and the king, in this sort of constant back and forth. And on the final night of the Exodus, at the Passover, okay, when Pharaoh's son dies, the king sends a message to Moses saying to get out of Dodge. Okay, Pharaoh says to Moses, "I've had enough of you. You get out, today. You leave." And that message arrives within 6 hours, because it arrives before dawn of the day of the Exodus. So because the Passover plague hits at midnight and Moses receives the message by the next day, by that, and I'm talking about the solar day, not the Israelite calendar day, the solar day. So before dawn, he gets the message to get out of town. Pharaoh had to be very, very close to Avaris in order to get that message there. So that rules out most of the kings of the 18th dynasty. In fact, it rules them all out. It's not a single king who lived that close to Avaris during the 18th dynasty. We only start seeing kings live next door. I mean, quite literally 2 kilometers away from Avaris was the Ramesside capital city of Pi-Ramesses. So starting with Ramses II and going on until roughly the Ramses X, the capital city is in the Delta. It's in the city of Pi-Ramesses. And that is something that is very, very interesting, because it sort of accurately reflects the back and forth between Moses and Pharaoh. But it only happens at a very specific time in history. there's other matters too that we see where having the king that close and the way that history worked out only makes sense during that period of time. Like for a big example of this is the adoption of Moses by the daughter of the king. Now, here's the thing: daughters of kings couldn't normally adopt. So this left sort of, you know, Bible scholars perplexed, because there's two. Adoption in Egypt was almost a universal right for women. A woman could adopt virtually any child she wanted that didn't have parents already. And the only two types of women in Egypt that couldn't adopt, that weren't allowed to adopt, were slave women and the daughters of kings. So this perplexed scholars for a long time. How could the daughter of a king adopt? Well, the short answer is she wasn't always the daughter of a king. But there were very few situations where you had a dynasty turn over like that, where, okay, you have a dynasty, you know, suddenly come to power, and a daughter just happened to be not born a daughter of a king and adopted prior to that situation coming into being. Well, just so happens that one of those periods, one of those rare periods of dynastic turnover, happened at the end of Dynasty 18. After the death of King Horemheb, he made his general buddy, Ramses I, who had been vizier at Avaris, king over Egypt. And we know that Ramses I had a huge family. He had sons, daughters, and grandchildren. So he had lots of quivers. He had lots of arrows in his quiver. So this was one of those rare times when a daughter of a king could adopt, because she wasn't yet a daughter of a king. And it just so happens that it happens just few decades before say Ramses II comes to power. Okay, I'm finished talking. I hope that answered the question. But there's lots of evidence there's lots of evidence like this. I mean, we're not short on evidence.
What's that?
We're not short on evidence.
Okay, gotcha. So just to summarize, the relocating of the capital to somewhere closer to Avaris is basically where the Israelites started with respect to the Exodus story. And then we mentioned earlier about how we had Egyptian influence in the Ark of the Covenant and other places in the Exodus narrative. We also talked about how we also see in the 19th or end of the 18th dynasty daughters of kings. That could that could realistically been feasible, to where the situation of the daughter of the king adopting Moses could be realistic, and things like that. Gotcha.
We also have those place names as well. They're all 19th dynasty. At least most of them are. And they're found in 19th dynasty documents, or they were built in the 19th dynasty, or they were renamed during the 19th dynasty. So that sort of sets the context too.
Gotcha. All right, everyone, give it up for Dr. David Falk. All right, where can we find you, Dr. David Falk?
I do have a YouTube channel, Ancient Egypt and the Bible, and we take questions every Friday night. So we do a Friday night live stream, and we take your questions live.
Gotcha. And I'm sharing that with everyone right now. Yeah, I mean, do you have any last words, Dr. Falk, in terms of getting familiar with the Exodus or apologetics in
Yes.
general or anything?
Absolutely, absolutely. Keep telling good stories, because that's how you're going to get to people. You keep telling them true stories, because history is a story, and it's one of the most powerful apologetic tools that very few of us actually use.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Sorry for bothering you, Dr. Falk, but so glad
And
that
it's
you
no
were able
bother. It's my pleasure. I just kind of wish the audio the audio would work better and the video would work better and all that. But
Yeah.
but it was a real pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
You made it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell for more content. Got questions or ideas? Drop them in the comments below. Until then, next time, thanks for watching. This is Boy Paul signing out. Peace.